lately? You've been on the road a lot.
I sure have. I've been working almost too much. It's hard to find that.
He was the rising star country music had been waiting for. With chart-topping hits, a dream career, and the love of millions, Keith Whitley looked unstoppable. But beneath the applause, a silent struggle was pulling him down. What looked perfect on stage was breaking behind closed doors. He had it all, until it all went terribly wrong. Join us as we reveal the truth. A voice born in the hills. Before becoming famous in Nashville and singing heartbreak ballads, Keith Whitley was just a boy from the Appalachian Hills. In that region, music was not just a hobby, it was a way of life and a way to share stories. It was a way to express emotions that were difficult to put into words. Keith always had a message deep within his soul that he wanted to share. Keith Whitley was born as Jackie. Keith Whitley on July 1, 1954, in Ashland, Kentucky. However, his family had strong ties to the nearby town of Sandy Hook, a small, peaceful community nestled in the hills of Elliott County. Sandy Hook was a place where everyone knew each other and their stories. Life in Sandy Hook was simple but challenging, with families working hard, money being limited, and few opportunities for success. Many boys in that area found solace either in church or alcohol, and Keith encountered both in his early years. His father, Elmer Whitley, worked hard in the coal and steel industries. He was a strong man who carried his burdens silently. He did not express his emotions much, but his struggles were evident in his silence. Keith's mother, Fa, was the opposite. She was loving, warm, and devoted to her faith. She saw more than just talent in her young son. She saw a tender, sensitive soul. Keith was not an outgoing child. He was quiet, observant, and contemplative. His soul was always seeking meaning, and eventually, his emotions found an outlet in his music. Keith had his older brother, Dwight, who was also musically talented. Dwight played the guitar and patiently taught Keith how to sing harmony. They would spend time together in their small home, their voices filling the space with beautiful bluegrass harmonies inspired by Carter Stanley and Bill Monroe. Keith learned from listening to records and from his brother, who supported and believed in him. He did not need a formal music education. He had the guidance of his brother, a record player, and a deep passion for music. When Keith was 9, he surprised everyone with his powerful singing. His voice was mature and emotional, able to make a room go silent. Even though he was young, his singing sounded like he had experienced a lot of sadness in his life. It was as if his soul was very old for his age. However, life would put him to the test, as it often does. When Keith was 13, everything changed for him. One day in the summer, he went on a drive with his brother Dwight and a friend on the twisting mountain roads. They were youthful, adventurous, and like many teens, they were speeding. The car went out of control, skidded off the road, and had a crash. Keith got thrown out of the car. Miraculously, he only suffered minor injuries and survived. Dwight was seriously injured. Unfortunately, their friend did not make it back home. The accident did not just leave physical injuries, but also emotional scars. For Keith, it was a defining moment that left a lasting impact on his young heart. Even though he survived, he carried the weight of the experience with him for the rest of his life. It was the first of many frightening experiences, testing his resilience against pain. Following the accident, Keith became more withdrawn and his laughter disappeared. He turned to music as a form of healing, using it to address wounds he couldn't articulate. Each song he performed became more than just music. It became a form of therapy and a way to express his innermost thoughts. Keith, at 14, was no longer just a boy who sang at home. He started performing with Dwight in a small local band, bringing their bluegrass music to various venues like church halls, school stages, and town gatherings. Despite his youth, Keith's voice was both youthful and experienced, captivating the hearts of those who heard him. One evening, fate intervened once more. The siblings participated in a talent competition in Easel, Kentucky. The stage was tiny, and the crowd was not very large, but destiny was present in the audience. Another talented young musician, Ricky Skaggs from Cordell, Kentucky, was among the spectators. Skaggs, who was also a teenager, was already gaining recognition for his talent. When he heard Keith perform, something special happened. After the performance, the two boys met, and it felt like they had been friends for a long time. Their voices mixed together perfectly, creating a harmony that seemed natural rather than rehearsed. A simple friendship developed into a strong connection. They were always together, tied together by music and their Kentucky roots. They saw themselves in each other, two boys with the same passion, talent, and dreams. They started on a journey that would lead them far from their hometown in Elliott County. Keith's childhood years were extremely significant to him because they shaped his future. His experiences in a small town, the influence of his father's quiet strength, his mother's warmth, his brother's guidance, a heartbreaking loss, and a life-changing friendship all played a huge role in molding him into the man and musician he eventually became. Once a quiet boy in his Sandy Hook home, he was beginning to speak up more. His voice would reach farther than anyone expected. A voice meant for the world. In 1970, when Keith Whitley was 15 years old, he was still figuring out life when something happened that would change everything. Keith and his friend Ricky Skaggs caught the eye of bluegrass legend Ralph Stanley, who used to sing with his brother Carter in the Stanley Brothers. Ralph Stanley was putting together a new lineup for his band, the Clinch Mountain Boys, and he wanted voices that could bring emotion to the classic bluegrass songs and make the audience feel the music. When Ralph Stanley listened to Keith and Ricky sing together, he was impressed by their raw and haunting harmonies and hired them right away. Keith had to leave high school to pursue his dream of becoming a professional musician. Even though he was too young to drive, he found himself touring the country with Ralph Stanley. Instead of attending school dances or football games like other teenagers, Keith was on stage singing about heartbreak, sin, sorrow, and redemption under the bright lights. It wasn't a smooth journey. Ralph Stanley did not coddle his band members. He wanted them to work hard, show discipline, and have respect for the music. For a boy from a small town in the Appalachian region, the sudden pressure was too much to handle. The nonstop traveling, the tiredness from late nights, and the feeling of being far from home all hit Keith at once. Instead of giving up, he faced the challenges head-on. He not only survived, but he excelled. When he performed on stage with his guitar and his voice filling the halls, he displayed a talent that seemed beyond his years. The road not only brought music, but also introduced Keith to alcohol, which was common among the musicians and travelers he encountered. Drinking helped pass the time between shows, eased homesickness, and numbed exhaustion. Initially, alcohol was a small comfort for Keith due to his sensitivity and emotions always being close to the surface. It made his feelings more bearable and softened his inner turmoil. However, it soon became a dangerous habit, with even Ralph Stanley expressing concern about Keith's heavy reliance on alcohol at such a young age. But all of those problems disappeared when Keith sang. His voice was naturally sweet, full of sorrow, and had a depth that couldn't be learned. It was the type of voice that touched the hearts of anyone who heard it, leaving them completely captivated. He spent some time performing with Ralph Stanley, gaining recognition in the bluegrass community. In the mid-1970s, Keith and Ricky Skaggs teamed up to create their duo, Whitley and Skaggs, recording songs and making a name for themselves in the world of bluegrass. Keith was feeling antsy. While he appreciated his roots in bluegrass music, he felt a strong desire to explore new opportunities. He yearned for songs that were more expansive and music that would enable him to express himself fully. His goal was to connect with larger crowds and establish himself in a different musical realm beyond the limited bluegrass community. In 1982, he took a big chance and moved to Nashville to pursue a solo career in country music. It was risky because not all bluegrass musicians were accepted in mainstream country music, but Keith had a unique voice. His voice was gentle yet strong, fragile yet consistent, and could move hearts with just one note. He had a calm demeanor that naturally attracted attention without him having to try. He joined RCA Records and initially collaborated with producer Blake Meese, known for working with George Strait. The initial recording sessions went well, but they did not quite capture Keith's unique sound. Something felt incomplete. It wasn't until Keith started working with producer G. Fundus that things fell into place. The songs started to come together, merging old-school country roots with a contemporary twist. At the heart of it all was Keith's voice, the same voice that used to sing old bluegrass tunes in dimly lit venues, now belting out songs that could leave listeners speechless. Keith Whitley had come a long way from Sandy Hook, Kentucky. He experienced a car accident, lost close friends, struggled with severe anxiety, and sought solace in alcohol. However, his music remained genuine, reflecting his honesty and soul. In the early 1980s, the world started to recognize Keith's talent beyond just the people in the mountains. He wasn't just a regular singer, he was a star whose songs captured the reality of pain and the essence of love. Even as his fame and reputation increased, the challenges from his past continued to haunt him. Despite achieving success by performing for Ralph Stanley at a young age, he couldn't escape the reminders of his hardships, showing that every talent has its drawbacks. Keith Whitley's climb to the top. Keith Whitley arrived in Nashville in 1983 without looking like a star that had already made it big. He did not have the flashy fame or the polished image of someone molded for success. However, he had something special, a unique voice that did not need to be loud to capture your attention. Once you heard his voice, you couldn't help but stop and listen. It wasn't flashy or full of gimmicks, but it had substance. With just a simple line, it could create a lasting impact. Keith Whitley's voice went beyond just singing country songs. It had the ability to truly touch people's hearts. Nashville experienced the unique power he brought with his singing. His first major achievement was when he released his music through RCA Records in 1984. The album was titled A Hard Act to Follow and had a mix of traditional and modern sounds. It showed glimpses of Keith's potential, but did not fully capture his true essence. It marked progress, but Keith was still exploring and refining his musical style to align with his emotions. Behind the scenes, there were conflicts happening. Keith desired a genuine, truthful voice that reflected his upbringing. He hoped his songs would capture heartache, the struggles of life, and the wisdom gained through tough experiences. He did not want to blend in with other artists chasing after popularity on the charts. Instead, he aimed for his music to have a deep significance. In 1985, Keith achieved early success with his album L.A. to Miami. While the album was more polished than he preferred, it brought him into the spotlight with hit songs like Miami, My Amy, 10 Feet Away, and Homecoming 63. Keith's voice began to gain recognition, and his unique style stood out in the music industry. Instead of conforming, he stayed true to himself and played from the heart. During this time, another narrative began to develop. Keith came across fellow country singer Lori Morgan, who was the daughter of George Morgan, a popular Grand Ole Opry star. Lori was a rising singer in her right, and when they met, there was an immediate connection. Their relationship progressed quickly and profoundly, leading to marriage in 1986. The love between them was strong, and they soon became parents to a son named Jesse. It appeared that Keith's life was complete, with a blossoming career, a cherished family, and a promising future ahead. However, under the love and joy, there was an ongoing battle. Keith had been dealing with alcoholism since he was a teenager. He was able to control it at times, but other times, it overwhelmed him. Lori supported him through it all, doing everything she could to prevent him from drinking.
I went over to his apartment with a friend of his, and we found Keith passed out, and we had to rush him to the hospital. But I knew.
She would hide bottles, take his keys, and even restrain him when she was afraid he would leave to drink. Their love was powerful, but it could not solve all of their problems. However, amidst the personal struggles, the music became more powerful. Keith refused to conform to music that wasn't authentic to him. Following disputes with RCA, he requested to shelve an album that did not reflect his true self. He prioritized sincerity in every musical note, striving for his songs to be a true representation of himself, rather than imitation. RCA ultimately agreed, and in 1988, Keith collaborated with producer Garth Fundis to create his most successful project. The album that changed everything for Keith was called Do Not Close Your Eyes. It wasn't just any album, it was a game changer. One of the songs on the album, also called Don't Close Your Eyes, was written by Bob McDill and became Keith's first #1 hit. The song was simple yet powerful, with raw emotion and honesty. It did not need flashy effects, just Keith, his guitar, and the truth in his words. The song climbed to the top of the Billboard Country chart and was named the best country song of the year. From there, the climb became steeper but more hopeful. 2 more hit songs came after that, When You Say Nothing at All and I'm No Stranger to the Rain. Each song felt like a personal diary being shared through music. Keith did not sing like he was performing, but like he was opening up and confessing. His voice contained both optimism and sadness, capturing a mix of joy and heartbreak. For fans of old-school country music, Keith was more than just a singer. He was a symbol of revival. Alongside Randy Travis and George Strait, he represented a return to traditional roots in country music. No longer just a bluegrass prodigy, Keith had become one of the top singers in the genre, known for bringing back authenticity in a time of change in the music. In 1989, Keith was on the brink of achieving a dream, being invited to join the Grand Ole Opry, which he had always wanted. Despite facing challenges, his marriage had managed to withstand the tough times. His career was thriving, and those in the music industry were starting to talk about him as a future legend at a young age. However, there were still lingering shadows. He continued to struggle with his health and drinking. Occasionally, he appeared to disappear, not physically, but mentally. His loved ones could sense this change, seeing the burden he was still carrying in his eyes. Earlier in the year, Keith completed recording his upcoming album titled I Wonder Do You Think of Me. He thought it was his best work yet, with his voice sounding deeper and his lyrics sharper. He had improved as a singer and storyteller. The album was scheduled to come out in the summer. Keith intended to take a break, recharge, and come back to perform even better than before. It seemed like he had finally achieved success. By incorporating the essence of bluegrass in the Appalachian Mountains, he had successfully influenced country music. He accomplished this not through loudness, but by staying gentle, genuine, and sincere. Many people did not realize that his biggest struggle was not over yet. It had just temporarily quieted down. Keith Whitley's success was genuine, strong, rapid, and impressive. He had contributed some of the most authentic songs to country music by staying true to himself. However, his rise also marked the start of a downfall that would have a lasting impact on the country music industry. The silent struggle of Keith Whitley. In the spring of 1989, Keith Whitley appeared to be living a life that many people dream about. His music was a hit on the country charts. He was well known nationwide, and his voice could bring audiences to tears. The success of his album, Don't Close Your Eyes, had elevated him to a prominent position in country music. Following a highly successful tour that filled concert venues and touched many people emotionally, Keith was at the height of his career. In his personal life, everything seemed great. His marriage to another country artist, Lori Morgan, had become strong after a tough start. They had overcome challenges together and were starting to create a stable and hopeful life. They had a baby together, bringing joy and special moments into their lives. Keith was also planning to release a new album that could bring him more success. With his family supporting him, the future should have been looking bright and promising. However, despite his success, Keith was haunted by a dark past. He bore a weight that even his popular music couldn't ease. His issues with alcohol started when he was a teenager in Sandy Hook, Kentucky, long before he became famous through his performances and tours. Although he tried to overcome it, the fight was ongoing. Alcohol was not just a temporary problem for Keith, it was a constant presence in his life that he struggled to get rid of. His loved ones were aware of his battle, as he had tried to seek help by going to rehab and making promises to change. Despite periods of sobriety when he showed his best self to the world, he would often turn to alcohol again in moments of loneliness or when feeling overwhelmed by pressure. In May of 1989, things had returned to how they used to be. Keith's wife was away in Alaska for a performance, so he was alone in Nashville. He seemed happy, saying he was working on new music and looking forward to playing golf with friends. Everything seemed normal on the outside. He was cheerful and supportive to his loved ones. However, addiction is often hidden and creeps up slowly, causing harm before it's noticed. On the 9th of May in 1989, Keith's day started normally at his house on Buttonwood Drive in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Over the weekend, he had been drinking with friends, but he appeared calm and relaxed to those around him. His final conversation with Lori was affectionate and supportive, showing no signs of hopelessness. In the morning, Keith's brother-in-law, Lane Palmer, came to visit at around 8:30. They had coffee, chatted casually, and Keith mentioned his plans to write songs and maybe go golfing later. There was nothing in his words or behavior that suggested anything unusual. When Palmer left before 10, Keith appeared unchanged from his usual self. Less than 2 hours later, Palmer came back. The house was silent, and Keith was still asleep. However, something seemed amiss. Keith's body was lifeless, his skin was cold, and he was unresponsive. At only 34 years old, Keith Whitley had passed away. The paramedics came fast, but they couldn't help. The reason for the death was severe alcohol poisoning. Tests revealed his blood alcohol level was 0.477, almost 5 times the legal limit for driving. To give some context, it was like he still had 20 drinks in his system. Even for someone who has been drinking for years, that much alcohol was extremely dangerous. There was no indication of any violence, doses, suicide note, or foul play. The only thing present was alcohol, and the body had reached its limit. Keith Whitley's death was a surprise to everyone. People couldn't understand how someone so young, talented, and adored could pass away alone in his home with a promising future ahead. The reality was both straightforward and heartbreaking. The struggle he had been fighting for a long time had finally taken his life. His voice was sad and beautiful, telling stories that many people heard, but only a few knew he was struggling. He seemed successful, being a rising star, husband, father, and friend. But inside, he was battling a hidden war that ended too soon. A voice that time could never silence. The legacy of Keith Whitley. In the spring of 1989, the country music world was shocked when Keith Whitley suddenly passed away. He had big plans, such as touring with Garth Brooks and performing at the Grand Ole Opry. RCA Records had high hopes for him as the next big thing in traditional country music. But then, he unexpectedly passed away, leaving everyone devastated. His passing was a huge loss for the industry and broke the hearts of those who cared for him. The news of his death spread rapidly, leaving many in disbelief. He was on the verge of reaching the peak of his career, but his life ended before he could fulfill his ambitions. The silence that ensued was overwhelming, making it seem like even country music was mourning his loss. On the day of his funeral, people from all over the country, including artists, friends, and fans, came together to pay their respects. Many traveled a long distance to attend, bringing flowers and tears with heavy hearts. Ricky Skaggs, one of Keith's closest friends, spoke at the service, overcome with emotion as he talked about the man they all cared for. Keith's wife, Lori Morgan, was devastated and shook as she placed a single red rose in his casket. Speaking softly, she said her final goodbye, bringing everyone to tears. The mourners were not just grieving the loss of a celebrity, but also a husband, father, friend, and a person who was fighting to survive until the end. In the weeks after Keith passed away, the world received his last recordings as a gift. Each song had a feeling of saying goodbye. One of the songs, I'm Over You, was played on the radio a lot, feeling like a haunting farewell. Hearing his voice in these songs felt like hearing him one more time, like he had left a message from beyond. RCA Records released tribute albums of his music, and other artists quickly recorded his songs. It seemed like the airwaves did not want to let him go. His wife, Lori Morgan, made sure his memory stayed alive. She sang duets using his old recordings, keeping his voice alive alongside hers. In 1990, she produced a tribute album for Keith Whitley, featuring stars like Alan Jackson, Diamond Rio, and Garth Brooks. They all honored the man who had touched so many hearts with his emotionally charged voice. However, although there was music playing around them, the moments of silence were the most painful for Keith's loved ones. The joyous laughter that would never be heard again. The unfinished songs he left behind. His once powerful voice, which could bring even the strongest men to tears, had suddenly disappeared, leaving a void that could not be filled with tributes. It wasn't just the end of his career. It was the premature end of a life that had so much more potential. Keith Whitley did not die because he was weak. He passed away due to addiction, which can affect anyone regardless of their talent or fame. Addiction does not show mercy and can silence even the most gifted voices. Sometimes, the most heartbreaking songs are not ones sung on albums, but the ones lived in real life. Keith's story did not have a final ending, but rather an unfinished chapter that still affects us today. His impact could not be forgotten. Even though he passed away young, what he created will last forever. Keith Whitley did not release many albums or go on huge tours. He did not win lots of awards either. However, in the little time he had, he created something special. He left behind a legacy of being real. He sang with true feeling, bringing out the emotions in his music. He reminded people of the true essence of country music, honesty, heartbreak, and storytelling that speaks to real life. During a period when country music was trending towards a more polished sound, Keith Whitley took a different approach. He emphasized the importance of authenticity over showiness. Whitley's sincere voice resonated with listeners in a way that couldn't be manufactured. Hits like Do Not Close Your Eyes, I'm No Stranger to the Rain, and When You Say Nothing at All were more than just popular songs. They were heartfelt expressions, revealing the depths of the soul. Fans did not just hear the music, they connected with it on a profound level. Even though he did not have a long career, Keith's impact was felt for years to come. Artists such as Alan Jackson, Tim McGraw, Garth Brooks, Dierks Bentley, and Chris Young credit Keith for influencing their music. His songs are still performed and honored because of the honesty and authenticity they convey. Keith's music serves as a model for what true country music should sound like and how it should make the listener feel. Recognition for his work was not immediate, but eventually came. In 1990, Keith was awarded posthumously with the Country Music Association's Single of the Year for I'm No Stranger to the Rain, just a year after his passing. In 2022, decades later, he was finally recognized for induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame. This recognition was long overdue but well-deserved, honoring the man whose voice continues to influence modern country music. Keith Whitley passed away on May 9, 1989, at the age of 34, which is considered young for most people. Despite his short life, he made music that continues to be loved and appreciated long after his death. His songs became an integral part of country music and resonated with listeners in a way that is hard to put into words. Whitley's music showed that country music does not rely on flashy appearances, but rather on authenticity. His voice embossed away this truth and made a lasting impact on the genre. Decades later, people still listen to his music. When they hear the beginning of his songs, they stop and remember. They can still feel the emotions and truth that defined him. He may have passed away early, but his talent lives on. What do you think about Keith Whitley? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.